Greetings and welcome to the proceedings surrounding the 18th Pfizer Colloquium of the Department of Statistics at the University of Connecticut. Since 1978, the Pfizer Global Research and Development and the American Statistical Association have provided support for this program. This support has helped us to bring the most distinguished statistical scientists to our university. It has also allowed us to film the Pfizer Colloquium and a conversation for the archives of the American Statistical Association. The University of Connecticut and its Department of Statistics remain grateful to Pfizer Global Research and Development and the American Statistical Association for their continued support. Before we proceed, I take this opportunity to record some personal observations. Late Professor Harry Poston was my colleague at the University of Connecticut Stores. Harry initiated the archival videotaping of distinguished statisticians for the American Statistical Association. He was the one who developed the Pfizer Colloquium series and chaired the National Committee for Filming of Distinguished Statisticians for more than 25 years. For 25 plus odd years, Harry nurtured this program like no one else could. He was uncompromising when it came to perfection. His love and dedication for the filming of Distinguished Statisticians series were legendary. Harry Poston passed away on March 23 of 2002, but I do feel and celebrate his indelible marks in every aspect of today's proceedings. I fondly recall that Harry got me involved in these matters almost 20 years ago. With love and respect, I dedicate this session to the memory of a teacher's teacher, late Professor Harry Poston. Now I call upon my colleague, Professor Bill Williams, to take over the proceedings.
I'm Professor Bill Williams from City University of New York at Hunter College, and we're here today to discuss with Professor David Brillinger some of the highlights of his career. With me today I have another colleague of his, Kjell Doksum, who spent many years at Berkeley with Dave, knows him very well. Kjell got here from Norway, I understand, on a fishing boat. So we'll have this discussion today. We have lots of things that we can discuss with David, and that's David on my far left there. David, I thought we might just spend some time and go through your, the history of your career in chronological order and see kind of what kind of things you remember. I do know that you grew up in Toronto, not so far from where I grew up, although we didn't meet till Bell Labs, but what do you remember from your days at the University of Toronto?
Fun. Trying to reserve squash courts, playing a lot of soccer, not being able to make the hockey team at Victoria.
Oh, yes.
Skipping a lot of lectures. I was lucky because I was good at math and you got to specialize. So I got to do math, and I did French because I thought that was important for Canada. Had to take a religion course once just to satisfy some requirement. But it was one of these, please don't throw me in that briar patch where all I get to do is math. I was happy to be in that briar patch.
Typical 90% of your courses were mathematics up there?
More, even.
Yes. Who influenced you into in your career direction there?
Well, I mentioned Nails McLean this morning, and he was the hockey coach, but he was also the mathematics teacher. And he just let me work.
That was in high school?
In high school, yeah, the University of Toronto schools. He just let me work at the back of the classroom. So again, it was one of those things where please don't make me have to sit all by myself at the back of the classroom. I had all these fun math books to be working my way through. And I was a big man on campus, not because I was hero of the hockey team, but because I was the pet project of the coach of the hockey team. So that was high school. Then at the U of T, there was a professor, John Coleman, and he found out I could read French I was mentioning, and so he got me reading Bourbaki right at first year, and that turned out to be a great secret weapon when I went to grad school at Princeton. all us Canadians had this. We could read these classic books by Schwartz and Paul Levy and so on, and the American students had to spend a couple of years learning those things. But it was sort of funny working with Coleman because there are these problems in these books. So he assigned me a problem. And I couldn't solve it. Then we'd meet and he couldn't solve it. I don't think we ever solved any of the problems in the books where we're Burecki, but I learned an awful lot from doing that. Then I ran into Art Dempster taught a course that was important for me. And
At Toronto?
At Toronto. The thing I remember about that was he gave out a list of the questions, of questions that might be on the exam. There were 25 questions, and he said he's picked 5 for the exam. So I just saw how to do the 25 questions, then came the exam. I was probably gone in 15 minutes. I mean, it's sort of like cheating on the part of the instructor to give out the exam beforehand, but that was fun. And then Don Fraser, he deflected me from becoming an actuary, as I mentioned this morning, and so on, and got me going to Princeton. He was very calm about it. He says, "Oh, David, yeah, become an actuary. Why don't you go to Princeton first?" And so I did that. So it was a lot of fun. We didn't have to work. We didn't work all the time like the modern students seem to.
Yeah. We now after that you got to Bell Labs, and that's where you and I met, and but we got to know each other very well there. And Dave Schell has a serious goof-off side. I don't know if you know this or not, but one of the things that Dave and I did when we got to Bell Labs was they had a 3-hole golf course on the front lawn. So we used to play golf at lunch every day. The problem is that lunch went on and on and on. And finally the water went on and the sprinklers at 2:30 every day. So I think we kind of ruined that.
Yeah.
Somebody decided it was a cost-plus business, but they didn't want to put on that kind of demonstration.
Of course, we were doing statistics all the way,
Yes.
every stroke.
Yes, yes.
Theorems,
Well,
proofs.
that happens to be true, actually. And but I also recall you having a luncheon with for new employees, as I recall. And Shelley happened to sit beside, if I remember this story correctly, he happened to sit beside one John Pierce, who was the executive director of research at Bell Labs, and John Tukey was the associate executive director. That was why there was so much connection between Bell Labs and Princeton. But John Tukey once remarked that John Pierce was his boss for very good reason, except John Pierce didn't have a great sense of humor. Why don't you take it from there, Dave?
Okay. So I was actually a Bell Labs fellow.
right.
That was a
Yeah.
summer job and support during the year, and so I ended up sitting next to John Pierce, and he asked me how I like working at the labs. And I said, well, I'm having a good time, but it would be nice if there's a swimming pool. And he looks at me and says, but this is a corporation. You can't have things like that. And I said, but you've got a golf course. And I don't know if he stomped off, but anyway, the conversation.
Oh, yes.
I mean, you need both things. I mean, I think you do better science if you have some happiness in the rest of your life. If you just keep at it, then you're going to just do the same stuff over and over and over. You need to be moving in different directions.
On the statistical side, there were a lot of people there then that you would have got to know. Martin Wilk, as well as John Tukey, and Colin Mallows, Dick Hamming. Do you remember kind of what you were thinking about and how you interacted with all those various people at the labs then?
You know, I didn't know how to behave. I don't mean in a bad way, but see, my father died when I was a baby, and I had 4 uncles, and they're all taxi drivers in Toronto. And this was before taxi drivers were getting killed all the time. So they were just getting to drive their taxis and deal with the people. And they just were these guys who were very full of life, and they just spoke to the people in the cab like they were their equals. So when I was at Toronto, you know, this sounds sort of arrogant, but it's not. It's just who I was. I was sort of treating Fraser and Coleman like, I don't know, like my uncles, let's say. So when I'm at the lab with Tukey and Colin and everybody, it was just like, I mean, uncle's probably the good word. That's how I treated them. It wasn't, And so it's been weird for me when I've had students at Berkeley, and they're treating me with this sense of awe, and I just set out very quickly to get them calling me David and things like that. I mean, I didn't really know this was abnormal till I sort of had got farther up the academic scale. And I don't regret it. I mean, I would tease Tukey, and he would respond. And David Cox, I would tease David Cox, and he would respond.
What kind of things do you remember working on at the time at the labs?
Okay, now I guess the thing that I got started on was John Tukey was seeking ways to tell nuclear explosions from earthquakes on the basis of seismographic records. He was he was part of the American team negotiating with the Russians in Geneva. So I was working pretty on that. That's really what got me doing a lot of programming. And then I was, well, you know, like as well as I, there were different data sets kicking around. There was data set on with the Van Allen radiation belt. I mean, they had just found that existed, and the labs had some data on that. And one thing I remember, problem I guess I solved, was that this satellite was sent up, and the yo-yos didn't come up. These were things that were like yo-yos, heavy weights that were supposed to spin off in space, take the momentum away so the satellite would slow down, but the satellite was up there going round and round and round. But it had these horns that were measuring how many particles were going in from a certain direction. And so I did a spectrum analysis on that and got this beautiful peak. But because the data was discrete, there's the problem of aliasing. You don't know whether that corresponds to this frequency or some higher aliases. But there's some optical information that said vaguely at what peak speed, what the rotation speed was. So that came out. So that was fun to sort of find something like that using spectrum analysis. That, you know, I think they were a bit stuck. How do you solve that?
You must have had interaction with Dick Hamming, and he was he was a freewheeling spirit. Yes. Similar to you at that time.
Yeah.
Do you remember? Did you do any technical work with Dick, or?
The one time I asked him something, it was, I think it might have been 10 to 5 even, was how to solve some integral equation or something like that, needing a numerical solution. And he looked at me and said, that'd take me 2 years, and I have to go home in 10 minutes. So that was one. And then he just came out with a lot of, he came around once. He even went to your office too. He said, well,
often.
How do you do research? How do you get your research problems and so on? And I said something or other. I don't know quite what I said, but he summarized and said, so you work with good people. And I guess that was right, but and so on. So he was a special guy. I mean, his book was very important to me.
Were you there, had Claude Shannon left?
Yes, he was gone. Yeah, I never laid eyes on him.
Yeah. I had gotten there just, I guess, just before Claude Shannon left, and one of the things I remember best about that was Claude Shannon going up and down the halls on his pogo stick.
Yeah.
So
it was a neat place.
Oh yes, there were a lot of strange things went on there at that time, and I certainly can remember. Not only did we play golf in the front lawn, but I can certainly remember people getting their kites tangled up in the big clock in the front of the Bell Labs main building. But I guess in retrospect, we can look back and think that was maybe the beginning of unstructured statistical learning.
Yes.
But
it was a wonderful atmosphere, and it worked. And we weren't really given problems to work on.
Yes, oh no.
I mean, the one disadvantage might have, in a sense, might have been that there were so many good problems. Someone would come in my office in the morning with a wonderful problem, you start working on it. Then some other person would come in the afternoon with another wonderful person.
Yes.
So in some sense, it was almost a relief when I got to when I moved to London, and I had some time to think about these wonderful problems. And I'm probably still working on some of the problems that came up at that time. It was special.
Did you work at all with Larry Shepp? I think you roomed with him for a while, didn't you? And he was, of course, at the labs.
Yeah, I could tell you a funny story about that. Yeah, no, Larry, he and I sort of look for each other pretty often. He comes out to Berkeley and so on. I didn't do any work with him, but we sort of sat in Feller's classes together at Princeton and things like that.
Yeah. Well, I don't know whether you remember all the hockey games that we went to when Kjell, I don't know whether you know this or not, but one of the first things David told me is he never wanted to be a statistician. He wanted to be a hockey player, and he's always been a Maple Leafs fan, and as I was at the time, I since became a New York Ranger season ticket holder. But nevertheless, I always loved the Toronto Maple Leafs. And last year, when they traded my favorite New York player to Toronto, Brian Leach, and so just to commemorate this occasion, I got you this sweater, Dave, and it's a.
You had it on the floor? You had a Leaf sweater on the floor?
Well, it was on this thing here.
I see, okay.
And so I got...
I know what I'm going to do.
I got this... Well, wait a minute. Hold on just a minute here.
Hey, that's good.
So I got you this Toronto Maple Leaf sweater, but I was so upset about the whole thing that I got Leach's name put on the back. So you got the sweater. Now, I actually thought about not giving it to you because I liked it so much. But anyway, we want you to have this sweater, commemorate the occasion.
Thank you very much.
So then maybe I should bring up the other story, the shirt story.
Oh, yes.
So David would mention to me a few times that he really enjoyed his days playing hockey in Princeton. He talked more about that on statistics. So one day I was on the East Coast and I saw this Ivy League shop where they had T-shirts. And one of the T-shirts said Princeton Hockey. So I thought that would be perfect for David, and I gave it to him, and he was so happy, very, very happy, and was one of his favorite things. It was so favorite that when he was going to give his Fisher lecture, he decided to wear it. But beforehand, he went to get some food in the cafeteria, and then next to him is this guy who starts talking to him about his shirt. And then David finds out this was what's the name?
Well, this guy turns around and he says, "I used to play hockey at Princeton." And I said, "You're Bill Hill. I went to your brother's wedding." He was a Princeton goalie when I was a graduate student there. So I gave him the shirt.
That's right. And then, but there's a happy ending to the story because you had another shirt, right?
Yes.
That he could wear, the Maple Leaf shirt.
Right. I have written papers on hockey, statistical papers on hockey. This is not just irrelevant banter.
No, that's
here.
right.
So
that's
have
right.
I.
Yeah.
Yes.
Indeed.
Yes. Anyway, one of the things that Dave and I discovered, and just kind of amazing, is that when we went to those Ranger games, we always sat behind the net because both of us had learned the best view of the game is from the end of the rink. So we sat behind the net all the time. But those were great times.
The thing that was special for me was I had never gotten into a Maple Leaf hockey game in Toronto. There'd be sort of some possibility if A was sick and B was sick and C was sick, one of my uncles would get the tickets and we'd go. Never happened. So going to Princeton meant I could go to see NHL games. So that was a real nice change.
I seem to recall we always went when the Leafs were there.
No, well.
Yeah. Yeah. Dave, one of the things I read, I was looking at this recently. Sam Wilkes, when I got to the labs and we had a lot of interaction with Princeton, he was writing a book on mathematical statistics. And do you know Sam's book, Kjell?
Oh,
Anyway, David was, I've just forgotten whether you were around in the summertime or...
It was the summer. I've been in the Navy on the Bonaventure aircraft carrier, and then I went to Princeton for the first...
Anyway, I think that was in the summer of 60.
59.
59?
Yeah.
Anyway, Dave told me that what'd you do all summer? Well, he worked the problems in the textbook over the summer on the golf course at Princeton. Well, I never thought too much about that till Sam's book came out a year later. And I'm still not sure if he really did those all in one summer. Those problems were tour de forces. As a matter of fact, I was looking at them, one of them the other day, Dave, and it wasn't just a problem he picked from the research literature. He'd actually demonstrated that if you prove this, you would get a better result than the research paper. So it's really true you did that, wasn't it?
Yeah. He told me to do it. He said, "Okay, you're on my grant. You
Yeah.
solved the problems in this book." I remember the look on his face when I took him the thing at the end of the summer, and he said, Said, how many of them did you get? I said, all of them except one. And he didn't put that one in the book. And he couldn't do that one. And it had been in some paper by Hungarians, and he didn't know where it was.
What was it? Do you remember?
Yeah, it was to prove the mean and median were asymptotically jointly normal.
Oh.
And I didn't know how a neat way to do that till about 1970.
There is a neat way to do that?
Yeah, using almost sure representations.
Dave, do you remember the little trick we pulled on Colin Mallows? Shall we? We were all pretty young, and we still used to look at problems in the Math Monthly, and Colin Mallows and Dave and I were looking at this problem one day, and I can't remember the problem or the details or anything about it at this time.
I think it was Roger Pinkham and you and
Oh yeah, it was Roger Pinkham. Yeah,
problem.
sorry,
Yeah.
it was Roger Pinkham.
Yeah.
But anyway, we decided we were going to pull a trick on Colin Mallows. That what happened was that I went in to ask Colin if he knew how to do this problem, and then 1 minute later, we timed it. 1 minute later, Dave and Roger were going to go in and quickly show him how to do the problem, which we'd already solved. In any event, the joke was on us, because when they got there 1 minute later, Colin had already done it. So,
we had a lot of fun.
yeah, we did have a lot of fun, but there was a lot of statistics going on.
Oh.
No question about that. Dave, how would you characterize those days in your statistical career? My impression is you were kind of more interested in time series and kind of
Well,
more
I
mathematical
would say I
statistics
became
for
a
those.
statistician at lunchtime. That's when I became a statistician. At Toronto, I had a good memory, and it would have been hard to tell that I didn't know a lot of statistics about, because I could just remember what, like an alphabariant, you add up sum of squares in every direction, but you know why? So it's sort of intriguing. How do you tell if someone really knows something, or they just have a good memory on an exam and whatever? But just those lunches at Bell Labs were wonderful, when people were really creating statistical methods and terminology and solving problems and sharing all these wonderful problems that were kicking around the labs at that time. Super.
Do you have some particular way were you inclined to more mathematical statistics side of things then, or not really?
I think I was just good at it. And
Yeah.
it was easy to do.
It just appeared that way.
Yeah. The thing I remember, that it wasn't until really almost I came to Princeton that I ever did any work that was outside of 9 to 5. You know, now
Oh,
you
I
see all
definitely-
these academics, and the students, they're just working
Yeah.
all the time. I'm very sad for them. But I guess I do it too now, so I don't know. We had a lot of time to just let ideas flow by and really concentrate hard on problem. And also Bell Labs had this wonderful open door policy. You know, your door swung into the hallway. Maybe that was telling people you're in. You know, you could see the door, and so on. And you go to a lot of departments, and it's like being in a hotel. You look down this long corridor, and there's all these closed doors. So it was very communal. I don't think anyone was ever thinking, I'm working on this so I can write a paper. Some of the paper writing even was very irrelevant. We were just all trying to help other people and find something interesting.
Well, do you think your style changed? Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
I remember you bouncing some ideas on antithetic variables off me at one point when you were at the labs.
Yeah.
I remember some years later looking, there's a paper by Brillinger in the Annals, so I started to read it. And it must have been 5 paragraphs in before I realized it was this problem. It had gone out into space somewhere.
Yeah.
Do you think your style changed at all in there?
Well, I get teased by Colin and Bryman and other people because I had a paper with a definition of a statistical problem in it. I mean, it's just sort of amazing. You know, you have a loss function and this and that, and this is measurable, and that's, whatever.
Yeah, so.
It's sort of fun, but I guess that's what I thought a statistical problem was back then.
Yeah.
Blame my teachers, Bill.
Well, I guess it's certainly a stylistic change in everybody over that period of time.
Yeah. But see, at the labs, one got to see what fun it was working with engineers and psychologists. I mean, there are people from a lot of different in economics that were there.
Yeah.
And you're helping them out and so on. And also, you got paid back because fun analytic problems to work on.
Yeah.
Came from this.
Well, your later work definitely looks like it's more data-driven than perhaps some of the earlier work was. I don't know whether that's an impression or true or not.
Yeah, totally. Maybe that's why I'm working the evenings now.
Or you're interested in it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. You know, when David was at at Bell Labs, and after he left Bell Labs, and Canadian students would apply to Princeton. He figured John Tukey would figure that I knew these students, so he'd come over and ask me how many Millie Brillingers was this student. So that was John Tukey's scale, Millie Brillingers. But anyway,
Mike Godfrey told me that too. I just got embarrassed.
yeah, but we had to tell him. I don't think
Yeah.
you.
Well, you told him somebody was 500 Millie Brillingers, or
And-
5,000, or 50,000.
No. I told him. I told him somebody was 500 Millie Brillingers, and John looked at me and said, "Wow, that good?"
Do you know how many Helens it takes to launch a boat?
No.
How many Millie Helens it takes
Oh.
to launch a boat? I got that wrong. Apologies. Yes.
Well, after we lost you to from Bell Labs, and you went to London School of Economics, and I guess I remember that you worked with Alan Stewart a lot there, or you at least knew him very well.
Yeah, I
personally.
knew him well, but I worked mainly with Jim Durbin. And also
Yeah.
there were 5 of us who were lecturers at the same time, and we just had a wonderful time. It was magic years at the labs when I was there, and that was magic years again in London when I was there. There were 5 of us, all the same sort of age, but in different parts of statistics, and we just had a lot of conversation. I mean, I was used to all this communal conversation stuff from being at the lab. So
Where
that
did
fit
your statistical efforts go in those days? How many were the years were you there, by the way? It
well,
was
most of the
3 or-
60s, really. No,
Most
it
of
was
the
a long time.
60s.
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
that how long
yeah,
was it?
yeah. was-
Where did your statistical efforts go? What kind of work in those days?
I told you about the earthquakes and nuclear explosions.
Yeah.
Well, so when I went to England, I mean, they too had a group working on distinguishing earthquakes from nuclear explosions. So they were at Black Ness, which was just outside Aldermaston. So I was consulting down there. I sort of had a lot of papers for them and things I wrote up, and they just didn't understand them, and it was sort of a bit weird. It was fun going down there and interacting with them and so on, but their procedures, I thought, well, why don't you do this? And they just didn't have the person in between me and the people who were actually the seismologists to realize this stuff. So that was one thing, and then I was interacting with the economists a lot. It was really it was also the most theoretical part of my whole career, because the economists would have series with, like, I don't know, 20 years worth of data, and the Korean War would be in it, so you really didn't have that much separate data. So that was, if you look at my papers, they were mainly theoretical in that period.
But there were economic papers at the time?
Well, they were more theoretical than that. I
Yeah.
think that the economic problem would have suggested something to work on, but then I abstracted it to make it more general.
I recall you saying about that period of time that you didn't want to work on socioeconomic data anymore because there was no structure to it.
Yeah, well,
Is
that's
that
right.
where you picked that up?
That's right, yeah. I enjoyed interacting with the economists and the
Yeah.
sociologists and the anthropologists and that whole group of people when I was at the LSE, but in terms of the sort of way I approach statistical problems, the meat just wasn't there. I mean, you heard me this morning. I mean, I was interested in the random process stuff, and so on. They've been doing that. They've been doing that now the last 15 years, let's say, and so on. Like the most recent Nobel Prize in economics was for Granger and Engel, and for a type of models for time series and so on. But back then, they just didn't have the data to support doing any series, any it somewhat seemed any model you thought it fit almost as well as any other model. So I had fun with my friends and did theory.
Mm-hmm. So when did you leave there?
At the end of '69.
69.
Yeah.
And
But I'd been at Berkeley on as a visitor in '66, '67, and that's when I first met Kjell.
Yeah, so that's when I started in Berkeley on the faculty in '66, right?
Yeah.
And when David came in '69, then shortly thereafter we started the soccer team, and we spent a lot of time playing soccer together.
Yeah.
It was
Wonderful.
a social, sports and social. After the games, we would sometimes go and have beer and pizza.
Yeah.
I mean, beer and pizza.
Yeah, right. A lot of fun moments.
And a lot of our students actually played.
Yeah.
So this was a way for students and faculty to get together.
Yeah.
And of course, at that time, Jerzy Neyman and Betty Scott You remember they had a lot of social activities. People would gather at lunchtime, and also on Saturdays. So
They were hard workers.
Yeah. Well, actually, you come in on Saturday, quite a few people were there,
Yes.
and they had very good cakes. They would not get cheap stuff. They had very good cakes there.
That was there's a funny story going on to that. It turned out the chemistry department had been paying for those cakes. Someone would go to a Claire to pick up the cake for the statistics department, and the cake would come over. But then, I don't know, 15 years later, they found these had all been being billed to the chemistry department. I don't think Betty Scott was malicious. I think she was just so busy, she never really noticed, and they never sent her a bill, so...
Well, and they probably had the money over there.
That's right.
Yeah.
Why would you complain?
Well, I think if she found out, she would have written the check. Yeah, that's just the sort of person she was. But, not you or I, of course.
Of course. You worked mostly with Jersey Neyman there?
I watched him.
You watched him.
And Blackwell I watched too.
So you worked with your students. You had wonderful
right.
students, right?
Yeah,
So I think that's what happened, actually.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's been my whole career there,
Right.
really. Because I think not other people were doing, they weren't doing applications.
That's right.
So I worked with Bruce Bolt, the seismologist. I went over there and I got working with someone from UCLA, Pepe Segundo, on things. So I just sort of got used to working with people remotely in some sense. And nowadays I think that's what a lot of people do because
Right.
of the web and so on. You can work with the best person on the planet for you to work with. And in terms of looking at the same thing on the screen and things like that, it's quite wonderful.
Right. So there were a lot of students that had applied interests, and they ended up working for you.
Yeah.
And in some cases, I think you would tell them to go and work, learn part of the applied area.
Oh yeah, that was
Right.
typical. Yeah, because it was going to be. I'd find out what they're interested in typically, and then I would say, okay, you go take a course in that. I mean, partly that was the system. You had to have people from outside the department on the exam committee and so on. But I really encouraged them to do that because it was fun. I mean, you're interacting with someone else who's teaching you about this material, and you're teaching them statistics and just the parts that you need and so on. So there's a whole succession of my students where there was another colleague at Berkeley who was important, George Oster. He's I guess a biophysicist, but he would be really collecting data of a very modern sort. So he'd come up with a new sort of data, and he'd ask me about it, and then I'd find some student and say, hey, why don't you work on dynamic tessellations or something like that? So it was very much driven by the applied problems.
Right.
And so on. My colleagues, of course, I saw at lunchtime, and when it was just nice knowing that if you ran into any analytic problem, there was a world's expert. All you had to do was go out in the corridor and walk along a few doors, and just knowing that help was immediately available, I think, meant you didn't worry about it. You sort of just kept working as you were, and of course you went and got it when you really needed it. Lunches were very important in Berkeley. That was typically Neyman and Elizabeth Scott and Lucien Lecomte and a bunch of students there, and just everybody was telling stories, and they verge. It was again like Bell Labs a bit, verge in and out of
I remember
stories.
the coffee room
Yeah, well, that's what I mean by-
at Berkeley.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
that's it. Yeah,
And-
that was it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
That was the hangout place.
yeah. It was good.
Yeah. So
The thing about the soccer was, you really got to know somebody. Because when
definitely.
somebody got kicked,
Right.
and was hurting, you got to see what their character was like.
Well,
in a way, you could know them 50 years and never get that information.
That's right. So there, we ended up with a network of soccer players. Anywhere you go in the world, they're going to be one of these people that you kicked and they remember you.
Yeah, well,
And they kicked you. So the students they had the right to kick professors, which was very important, I think.
and
Yeah.
first name basis, and
Yeah.
all that sort of stuff. That's how I got interested in going to Brazil, because we had
A kick?
5, well, probably, yeah. There were 5 Berkeley statistics PhDs who went to Sao Paulo, and I'd played soccer with nearly all of them, so I knew them really, really well. And so when I went down there, there was the first time there's this built-in group of people that I was as close to as you could be to other people, and so on. So of course, and most of these students have been incredibly
So
successful.
these 5 were
too.
all yours, weren't they?
No, three were mine.
Okay. So then, you know, you're an honorary Brazilian, but you're also an honorary Norwegian.
That's right.
He's a member of the Norwegian Academy of Science
Yeah.
and Letters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you are?
Yeah.
Oh, tell us about that.
Well, I don't know for sure what I am because the certificate was all in Norwegian.
Ah,
okay.
Yes, I should have brought it for Kjell to see.
Yeah.
But I had 3 Norwegian students who...
I see.
Knut Aase,
Yeah.
I mentioned this morning, and Jostein Littlestone and Torschvader.
How many students have you had now at Berkeley?
I'll guess 35.
35?
I've got 4 right now. So they're the best part of Berkeley by miles. That's just the treat of being
Tell
at
us where
Berkeley.
some of them are now.
Okay. Well, my first student, Raju Bansali, was at London School of Economics. He's now at Liverpool University. The second one might have been Alan Eisenman.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
he's at Temple. He was in Washington for a while at the NSF. I could have brought a list. They've all become friends, and sometimes I wonder, could I have a student who was a right-wing fascist and it work out? Because I mean, I know I have the moral, social, professional responsibility to supervise any student who wants to work with me, and so on. But they all end up being very close and quite left-wing. So, you know, where that comes from, I don't know.
Selection process.
Well, I guess.
Well, see, people who go to Berkeley tend to be that way.
I guess that's true. They all speak up. That's one of the first lessons. I say, I'm not going to sign your thesis unless you're speaking back to me, talking back to me. And they said, look at me. But, you know, I mean, you're not going to survive out there if you're not talking back to the authorities and so on.
Yeah, I suppose that's true.
Yeah.
Now, was it in there that you kind of began the shift from what we might describe as the formal time series processes, methodologies,
Yeah.
into stochastic processes? How did that come about?
I thought you were going to say 2 applications. That's sort of easier because I like people, I like working with people, and when you do the theoretical stuff, you're in your office alone most of the time. Whereas when I was interacting with Bruce Bolt, say, I love sailing, he loves sailing. You want friends with sailboats. Bruce has a sailboat, so we've spent a lot of time talking about statistics and seismology and the sailboat. And it's sort of interesting with Bruce, and I hear this a number of times from other people, because a lot of people just don't have a clue what statisticians work on, and so when they learn, they'll think, I want to be a statistician. So Bruce has said to me fairly regularly, you know, gee, I wish I'd become a statistician, because his degree was in applied mathematics, and he went into seismology because he wanted to be applying it, but he could have done his seismology as a statistician and done a lot of other things also. So I just was reaching out to other people to work with on campus and so on. And then the reason the stochastic processes was coming into it was just the new data types were of more complicated form. I was listing some of curves and tessellations and things like that this morning. So.
Well, the curious thing is that seems to have been happening very broadly, not just in your life. And that may be because of the high-speed computers, or what do you?
Yeah,
Is that?
yeah. Well, that's what I was trying to make a case for this morning. There are these wonderful hardware, wonderful software
Yeah.
for collecting these things. I mean, at one point I was waiting for the day when I could read Star Wars, the video, into S Plus and do some things with it. And I think we're almost there, if we're not there already. You know, these mass amounts of data, time and space, and so on. One of my students is Puerto Rican, and he was in all the salsa bands in the Bay Area. When he's always sort of doing this sort of stuff on the table when he's in your office and so on. And he came in and he said, could he do some work with me? And I said, sure. So he just sort of looked at me. I looked at him, and he looked at me. And then I said, well, what are you interested in? And he gave some sort of silly statistical things. And I said, well, no, what are you really interested in? In music. He was really interested in music. So everything nowadays is data. I mean, all the MP3 stuff and so on. So his thesis was on building statistical models for music and so on. Well, one of the telling things in his thesis when he had some music played by a flute. He fit the signal, he subtracted the signal out from the original music. So you could basically hear the saliva going down the tube of that's called a residual analysis. So that's some sort of metaphor for what statisticians do. Get rid of the music and you're left with the junk.
But perhaps I should mention some theoretical work that David did. He was asked to give a paper for the Eric Lehmann Festschrift, the first Festschrift. So I think because Eric was sort of theoretical, David ended up writing a more theoretical paper, and it was about parameters that are stable. So as you mentioned this morning, there are certain parameters that have scientific meaning that you're interested in, but to make the model fit, you also need to introduce other parameters, often called nuisance parameters. And what David showed was that in some situations you can actually have meaning, or you can alter the original parameter a little bit and still it'll retain its meaning even when you have introduced other unknown nuisance parameters. And so that relates to transformation models, where in 1982 Box and Cox had written a paper saying that the transformation parameter, the power parameter in a transformation model, if you assume that it wasn't known, then the main parameter, the beta parameter, didn't make any sense because it was measured on an unknown scale. And then what David showed was that, well, David had a much more general framework, but it applies in this case, and it tells you that what you can do is you can estimate the direction of the beta parameter and the relative importance of the different covariates, and that's what, in a sense, is identifiable in that problem. And then he showed how to do this using just least squares, very simple methods.
For me, that was natural because you probably know I have a logo. 2 pi is not 1. And that's because I keep losing factors of 2 pi when I'm doing Fourier analysis. So I have this on my door and on my website and all these places. And it doesn't matter usually because you're making a graph. And so what we're talking about is whether you pay any attention to the numbers that are on the y-axis. So if you're just looking at the shape of the graph, that axis just doesn't matter.
Right.
I remember that result really surprised Neyman. I know I gave a talk on it. He was in the front row and he said, "Really?" That was sort of fun. I was surprised myself when I found it. But,
and there is a penalty to pay for not knowing what the unknown nuisance parameter is, and then you show what that penalty is. Right. And so that result is used quite a bit in econometrics, and they talk about index models, and this is where it comes from. So that was 83 Festschrift.
Yeah, that
right.
Sounds right. Yeah. So, whatever.
Dave, do you remember the Bell System Business Office study?
Keep talking.
Okay. It was the first really big data study I ever got involved in. And what it had to do with was, you know, in the old days, you phoned up the Bell System, one of the local operating company, and somebody picked up the telephone and you talked to them. And they had all these different kinds of things that they wanted to do. And anyway, a friend of mine asked me, they wanted to be able to study these so they could know how to organize them and make them efficient and all that kind of thing. So in those days, no self-respecting statistician wanted to get involved in what was called a time study in those days.
Oh, yeah, now I remember.
But anyway, I did because I knew the man quite well and wanted to help him. But anyway, it turned out to be incredibly interesting. But and we had these mountains of data coming in from all over the country on what these service reps were doing essentially by the minute and what they were working on, because it all got classified. They filled out forms. Many years later, the study went on for a long time. But Dave, I don't know where you were, but all of a sudden, I got this. You remember the blue email letters? Airmail letters?
Airmail, sure.
The blue airmail letters.
Right,
Well, I suddenly got this blue airmail letter from David somewhere in the world, Australia or somebody, starts up, "Say, Bill, Say, Bill, about those parameters.
Yeah.
And so he's got all how to do these parameters. And this was a long time after you had had contact with her and discussions. And that's that was something I think we began to discuss on the golf course.
Yes, yeah.
But that study turned incredibly interesting, actually. There were a lot of things. At one point, I had a draft of a paper called Parkinson Phenomena in the Bell System Business Office. It's very interesting. But that actually leads me into asking you about all the places you've been. It seems to me you've been a lot of places, not just on leave, but on trips. And
Oh, sure.
I wonder if you'd just kind of
Well,
talk about those for a few minutes.
you grow up in Scottish Presbyterian Toronto in the 50s. You're going to get moving.
Well,
So my first move was to get in the Navy. So I got to be in Nova Scotia for 3 summers and a bit more, and then Victoria summer. Went to Belgium and Scotland and Mexico, California, and a minesweeper in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, Saint Pierre and Miquelon. And then I luckily met Laurie, and she had done more traveling than me, but we both. I thought often that my family's natural state was traveling. Somehow we just were all pumped up and enjoying it and things like that. I mean, I had 2 sons and so on. So that those are so Brazil has been a recent place I've been to a lot, but New Zealand we've been to very often. Both you and Kjell know we had this son Jeff who basically had a brain tumor for 20 years and so on before he died, and so we wanted, and he had a batch of surgery. And we wanted to go to somewhere peaceful, and we had this good friend Alistair Scott in Auckland, New Zealand. So we went there, and it was just wonderful. Jeff, he became a healthy person again, and he could do things like play basketball at the local Y and ride the bus home at 9 p.m. on Friday night when he was like 13 years old. The way I used to be able to do these things, things he couldn't have done in Berkeley. So he just was in a very gentle environment and got well, and so. I guess in some sense New Zealand has been the place we sort of flee to. You know, after Jeff died, we went down there and so on. So we have a life in New Zealand. And Matthew, my younger son, he ended up going to graduate school in New Zealand. Now, I've never really asked him, is this because of you have these nice associations with life becoming good again when you're in New Zealand and so on. And then, well, we lived in London. We just like to travel. I mean, I really like South America at this point. I've been to Buenos Aires and Venezuela and so on.
How many formal leaves did you actually have, or sabbaticals from?
Well, I mean, every 7 years you get a 50% leave. But see, and I had a couple of Guggenheims, but they just seemed to. I mean, it was lucky in a sense, but not so lucky, because they seemed to always happen when Jeff was sick again. Yeah, and he'd had surgery, and so that really takes a year out of your life dealing with that and so on. I'm not in any way, shape, or form complaining or being sad. I mean, I'm sad obviously about Jeff going through all this, but it just sort of worked out, and luckily we had that extra time to sort of look after Jeff in those periods. Brazil's super. I mean, Canada's super. I mean, we've been many places in Canada.
You were one of the first people to go to China.
That's right.
When that opened up.
Yeah. I'll tell you, I mentioned Laurie. So she went to China before me. There was a midwife medical tour that she went on, and I didn't get one of these, but apparently she sent postcards to most of our friends saying, I beat David to China. And so she had, and I went the next year, and I had a wonderful time. But we each had a parent who was born in China, so it had a special attraction for us. Her mother and my father might have been in the same room in China at some point when they were little kids. My grandfather being Canadian Methodist missionary, Laurie's grandfather being American Methodist missionary, but they're both in Sichuan part of China. Travel's fun. I mean, that's one of the perks of our thing. I got to go to Alaska. You heard me this morning. Right. I got to drive a dog team in Alaska. Talk about fun. It's one of these things where you're sort of in control, but you aren't really. And I just sort of learned, well, okay, I'm just going to let it rip, and we'll see what happens.
On wheels or on snow?
On snow.
Really?
Snow. With, I don't know, 8 or 10 dogs going madly in front of you. At one point, this rabbit ran across the track I was on, and I Jesus Murphy, what do I do now? But luckily the dogs just kept
Just
going.
ignored him?
Yeah, kept going
Yeah,
straight.
yeah.
And see, there's this community of statisticians that's in all these places, and Kjell was saying how we've played soccer with many of these students who've then gone home and have had very successful careers in their country. So there's just someone waiting at the airport to meet you, and then immediately you're drinking beer and not talking about statistics, but talking about soccer, but then the statistics just sort of, it's always present. Yeah, so you know, what have you done lately and so on. And I think a lot more work gets done when you just dip into it rather than keeping at it very intensely. And that's sort of, I think, what the three of us have done a lot of.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true, actually.
Yeah.
You know, when you first started to get into your discussion of your travels, I don't know whether he's ever told you this, Kjell, but one of the first things he told me was he used to get these, he was in the Navy in Canada, and he used to get these sailboats and go buzzing around in Halifax Harbor, annoying all the ships, the big ships, because he had the right of way. And that's typical Brillinger, getting in there, stirring things up.
I wasn't going to make them do anything bad, but you know, I had the right of way.
Yeah. Well,
They've since changed the rules of the road. Now the power ships have right of way over sailboats. It used to be power gives way to sail. So I was in this little tiny dinghy, sort of. I mean, I wasn't doing it deliberately, but I didn't sort of back off.
hey, I don't know. Not in Muskoka Lakes, Dave.
Oh, okay.
You still got to get out of the way.
Really? Got to
Yeah.
get out of the way?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I know San Francisco Harbor, and I'm sure Halifax Harbor is like that now.
Yeah.
It seems sort of funny to say, I mean, given today's world, but I had a lot of fun in the Navy. You know, it was sort of like 2% about guns, but the rest was like took a week-long firefighting course. We were in these big suits shooting hoses, these massive hoses at each other and things like that. And I did, actually, my first original statistical problem I solved was when I was in the Navy. Because this one summer, I was going to be on the aircraft carrier, and it was going to be going in a week or two. And they needed to find something for me to do. And so I was a communications officer. So I went to the communications place in Halifax, and they sort of looked at me. What do you do? You know, I'm math. You know, and the statistics. And, oh yeah, how about you make a plot for us of the number of messages the fleet was sending between the ships, you know, for each week.
Mm-hmm.
So they take me to this room, and this room is just full of these stacks of these things. And I sort of look at this, and then I go back out and say, have you guys got a scale? And you know the solution.
Yeah.
And they find me one, so I go in and I just sort of, I don't know, I counted 100, how much is that weigh? And then I just put these stacks on the thing.
Yeah.
I was sort of out of there, and you know, by lunchtime. But that was fun. But it was just a lot of guys from all across Canada. It was really super. You get to know the people of your country from doing something like this. It'd be nice if there was another way to have this easily done, but I did learn a lot of communications, a lot of navigation, and that stuff, like the SEALs, I mean this Great Circle route, well, I sort of knew the formulas for that stuff from my Navy period. So
Spherical trigonometry?
yeah,
They
sure.
taught you that stuff in the Navy?
Well, they didn't teach me because I knew
You
it.
knew it.
But the rest of the guys, they had to struggle with this stuff. I mean, and they would be from sociology and all these other fields. And some of it wasn't fair. I think if you're good at mathematics and you're not forced to take a lot of broadening courses, then you're in a winning route. You know, I'm always
Yes.
telling our students, learn as much
Yeah.
theory as you can, because today's theory becomes tomorrow's practice.
It does.
Yeah.
We've been discussing with Dave Brillinger some highlights of his career. Kjell Doksum is on my left, a colleague of his at Berkeley. I'm Bill Williams, and we've known David Brillinger for many, many years, both of us, and we've enjoyed talking with him this afternoon, get his recollections of what went on over the last many years in his statistical career.